Hi, welcome to the Aerospace Industries Association of Canada's podcast. It's hosted by me, Mike Mueller, Senior Vice President of AIAC. In each podcast, we will be exploring topics of interest to our sector by interviewing leaders in both the Canadian and international aerospace industry and relevant thought leaders in order to provide timely perspective and context in the world of aerospace in Canada. AIAC is committed to serving its members by being the bridge between industry and the government while bringing industry together, acting as its voice. Hope you enjoyed the pod. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in and joining us today. My name is Mike Mueller, Senior Vice President at AIAC, and we have a great lineup today. And just a reminder for those tuning in live that we will have some time for question and answers after the discussion. So please put them in the chat function and I will ask them after we have wrapped up. Also, feel free to email them to myself. Just a quick reminder to put yourselves on mute. Our association represents more than 95% of aerospace activity in Canada. Our members are located in all regions of the country and range from very small to very large businesses, operating in all three segments: space, aerospace, and defense. Throughout this COVID-19 crisis, the team at AIAC has been working day in and day out to connect the industry and ensure that your voice is being heard. You should be receiving our news. You can use e-newsletter updates and be sure to check out the aic.ca website. When you've had issues, we've been happy to raise them with the relevant folks, be it here in Canada with Canadian government officials and parliamentarians, or in other jurisdictions with foreign officials and stakeholders. Given the current state of things, it may still be a while before we return to any sort of normal, and that means the challenges will continue. We're here to serve, so please continue to use us as a resource to help navigate these tough times. We've also shown how governments around the world are investing and promoting their industries. We need our parliamentarians to promote our industry if we are to remain globally competitive. So here to give us their perspectives, representing all of the major political parties, we are very pleased to have the co-chairs of our Parliamentary Aerospace Caucus. Member of Parliament Yvan Baker from the Liberal Party, Member of Parliament Matt Jeneroux from the Conservative Party, Member of Parliament Alexandre Boulerice from the New Democratic Party, and Member of Parliament Simon-Pierre Savard-Tremblay from the Bloc Quebecois. Thank you all for making time to be here today. Moderating the discussion will be someone who our industry is very familiar with, a good friend and a fierce advocate for aerospace, former Deputy Prime Minister and Quebec Premier, partner at McCarthy Tetro, Chair of Vision 2025, the Honourable Jean Charest. So, Mr. Charest, I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you very, very much, Mike. I haven't had that good an introduction in a long time. And I'm delighted to join you today. And I want to welcome everyone to this discussion, which, by the way, will happen in both official languages, the vast majority being folks on the line are speaking English. So, but if you have questions or comments, or if you want to ask them in French or in English, please feel very, very quite at ease to do so. We may do a little translating as we go along, and that will be fine. But we want you to be able to throw your hat in the ring at any time. The timing of this webinar couldn't be better in terms of the future of the industry. Of course, COVID-19 is the story. It's dominated our lives for the last few months, but way before that, the industry had recruited me to do national consultations about the future of the aerospace industry in Canada, which I was very happy to undertake given the role and the importance of this industry for the country and for Quebec, where I was premier for close to 10 years in particular, and which brought me to pay special attention to this industry, the jobs, the technology, the investments, the role that it plays in trade. All of them are key issues for the future of the country. Alors, le secteur de l'aérospatial, de l'aéronautique, de tout ce qui touche ce secteur est extrêmement important pour l'avenir du Canada. Et ça, c'était une vérité bien avant la crise et la pandémie, mais ça l'est encore davantage dans un contexte de pandémie. Et d'où l'importance du webinaire aujourd'hui qui vous offre l'occasion de participer à cette discussion. So we have with us today, for the purpose of this discussion, representatives of the political parties in the House of Commons. And as Mike has pointed out, we have a aerospace caucus and 4 co-chairs from every one of the parties to help us out in communicating with the elected members of the House of Commons and the Government of Canada. And we'll be talking to them in a few minutes from now. But I want to return to the context and just remind everyone that well over a year ago, we tabled a report, the AIAC, that called on the government of Canada to up its game in the area of aerospace. The point we made in the report after national consultations is that this industry in advanced manufacturing is the key leading industry in the country. I say it unabashedly. I mean, we should be proud to affirm that. We do $1.4 billion a year of research in R&D. There's no one else who does as much as that. No one, by far. 215,000 jobs and a contribution of $25 billion to the GDP of the country. And the reason why that's the case is because the governments of Canada have supported the industry. Historically, that's been the story for the last 80 years. And this is an industry, may I have to repeat it again, that is closely tied to working in partnership with governments. There is not a place in the world where this industry exists without partnering with government. The reasons for that are pretty simple. I mean, the amount of money needed to invest in technology, to advance it, the timelines, all of this requires that there be this type of partnership, or there simply isn't an industry. Now, one of the particular aspects of the industry in Canada is that we don't have the defense spending that other countries do. You know, companies like Boeing, Airbus, receive between 25 or 30% of their revenue stream comes from defense spending. And that money crosses over into the civil sector in R&D and development of products. In Canada, we don't have that advantage. What we do have as an advantage is a strong track record of being among the best in the world of producing civil planes, simulators, helicopters, motors. I mean, all of these things we do very well. The space industry is iconic in Canada, the famous Canadarm. Not only did we do it, we're going to repeat it. We're now part of the initiative so that we can do it again. And that is going to be very significant as the NASA has set an objective for itself, by the way, mandated by President Trump, nonetheless, to return to the moon and install a manned mission on the moon and then go to Mars. All of this is, you know, for the next generation of Canadians is going to be very exciting and very interesting. We do have, and this was before the pandemic, a real issue, is that the government support has not been at the level that it needs to be for us to remain competitive. In fact, what it lacks most is probably a sector-specific approach, which other countries have and always have in this type of industry. And the industry itself has been reaching out to our partners to say, we need help. We need help. We need your support. We need active partnership to be able to do this. We tabled a report over a year ago. There were 6 parts to it. One of them is on labor. I want to emphasize that. The average age of the industrial worker in the aerospace industry is 54 years old on the plant floor. Now, if that isn't close to a crisis situation, it is going to be if we don't do anything about it. And we made several recommendations on how to address that, including incentivizing experienced workers to stay on the job, or recruiting and being much more efficient through immigration and recruiting the expertise we need, or then training more young people. SMEs are a big part of it. We need to digitize. We need to upscale them. We need the government to put together programs that will allow these small and medium-sized businesses to move up that chain to the new level at which they need to be competitive. And then there's the regulators, Transport Canada. We saw the MAX story, and by the way, the MAX story appeared after we tabled the report, just reminding us that if the Government of Canada and Transport Canada doesn't have the resources they need to do their regulatory job, there is no industry. It is key to absolutely everything that we're going to be doing in that area. On the aerospace, I've already mentioned, the opportunities are extraordinary, and we need to be part of that. And also on defense. We need to do defense procurement in a much more efficient way, and one that allows us to reach out to SMEs, for example, and make them part of that chain. On innovation, finally, and that's where I think there's probably an extraordinary, exciting opportunity for the future. On innovation, if we're going to have a partnership with government, now's the time to put our minds to the carbon neutral plane, to the unmanned plane, to all the technology and the things that Canada does well that allow us to develop the next generation of technology that is going to make this industry a leader in Canada and a leader in the world. Now, since then, COVID-19. COVID-19 has affected everyone, all of us. You're elected members of parliament. I don't need to remind you of that. But in the case of this pandemic, it has affected certain industries more than others. Service sector, of course, is gravely affected. But the airlines and aerospace more than the average industry. In the case of the airlines, I don't need to tell their story. They express it very well, and we all know what has happened. And the perspective of them returning to what was previous level of business is still far into the future, but there's obviously a connection to aerospace, of selling planes, of developing them. And it has put the aerospace industry in the world in a very precarious position. Alors, la pandémie a un effet sur tout le monde et l'ensemble des industries. Mais permettez-moi simplement de réitérer à quel point cela a un effet beaucoup plus important dans le secteur de l'aéronautique, le secteur aérien pour les transports aériens, mais l'aéronautique que la moyenne. Parce qu'évidemment, dans le contexte de la pandémie, les avions sont cloués au sol. La reprise du transport aérien n'est pas prévue avant, honnêtement, quelques années. On espère que ce sera plus rapide que ça, mais les prévisions sont qu'on ne reviendra pas à un niveau d'affaires que nous avions connu avant la COVID, avant 2022, la fin de 2022. Il y en a qui prédisent même plus loin. Alors, il y a un effet, évidemment, d'entraînement sur l'ensemble de l'industrie. Now, other countries in the world have addressed this issue because they've moved from the crisis programs confinement of surviving to stimulating the economy. That's what we're hearing now in Ottawa. If we've all followed the stories of how the government is actually preparing for a speech from the throne, they prorogued Parliament. There'll be an economic statement or a budget. Maybe some of you can tell us about that because no one knows really for sure. But let's assume there's a budget. The expectation now is that the budget will focus on stimulating the economy. And who are the targets, the companies, the people we need to generate wealth that is going to be able to sustain our country and the middle class and all Canadians, rich or poor? And as we look ahead, this industry is one of the industries that we must support, that is going to be in a position to generate wealth and prosperity if we get the right type of partnership. Other countries have responded. In France, they've launched a $26 billion program. Germany's launched a program. Europe, the United States, even Hong Kong has put together a program. Canada, in this respect, relative to our competition in the aerospace industry, is late to the game. Alors, nous avons pris du retard, non seulement dans notre positionnement dans le monde, mais dans notre capacité de soutenir l'industrie pour la prochaine étape, celle de la reprise économique. C'est ça l'enjeu. C'est ça l'enjeu le plus immédiat. That's the most immediate issue that we're facing is how do we work together to be able to support the industry and allow it to create the jobs and the wealth it always has and be a leader in the world. Now, I hate to finish on a more negative note, but, we've reached out to the best experts in the world to help us see our way through on what's happening in the industry now. And we went to Roland Berger, one of the studies they did for us, that come to the conclusion that Canada's been losing ground for the last 7-8 years. We've been losing ground. We used to be 5th in the world. We're now 7th, 9th. There's less jobs, less manufacturing jobs over that period of time. And it means that our industry is losing its competitive edge relative to the rest of the world. And one thing all of us have to keep in mind, nothing's static. I mean, the competitors we had are always there and new ones because other countries are not going to stand by and just watch this industry evolve without wanting to have a piece of it. It's that simple. So we have our old competitors and new competitors, and we lack right now an overall overarching policy in Canada, a sector-specific policy that would allow us to remain competitive, maybe gain some market share, and continue to do what we do well, and be one of the best countries in the world in the aerospace industry. So I wanted to set the table for us. We're going to have a discussion today that I hope will be very constructive and open, and then I may have a few questions, or Mike, and then our membership who's on the line may have some questions. Alors aujourd'hui, on ouvre la discussion sur l'avenir de l'industrie. Et comme il y a des événements importants qui sont à l'agenda, un discours du trône, un budget, etc., ce sera l'occasion pour nous de vous entendre sur la position que vous défendez et celle de votre parti sur l'avenir du secteur de l'aérospatial. So I'm going to start with Yvan Baker, who was recently elected in this last general election campaign from Ontario and was previously at Queen's Park and was previously a parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Finance. So numbers is something that you have experience with, Yvan. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And after we talk with Yvan, I'll give you the roll call so that you know I'm going to go to Matt Jeneroux, who I see on my screen. Hello, Matt. And we'll introduce you a little more after we talked with Yvan. Then nous allons aller vers vous, Alexandre Boulerice, et ce sera l'occasion de vous entendre et entendre la position du NPD. Finalement, Simon-Pierre Savard-Tremblay, que je vois également à l'écran, du Bloc Québécois, qui pourra nous adresser la parole. So, Yvan, please, I guess on the things we're curious to hear is what can we anticipate in the next few months in regards to government's management of the public agenda? We know a speech from the throne, and what is your perspective on the things that we should be paying attention to or that you think we should be doing in support of the industry? So, Yvan, thank you again, and please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Charest. And before I begin in answering your question, I just wanted to thank you, first of all, for hosting this session and thank all the AIAC members for being here today. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. I'd like to thank you, Mr. Charest, for not just hosting, but also for your work and the team's work on the Vision 2025 report, which you referenced. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank you for your many years of service in federal cabinets, House of Commons, as Premier of Quebec, and the National Assembly of Quebec. And you mentioned at the outset, Mr. Charest, when we were just all logging in, that you noted that I had served in the provincial legislature in Ontario and now in the federal parliament. So someday I hope to have the chance to compare notes with you about the differences between federal and provincial politics. We'll save that discussion for another day, but thank you again for hosting this. I was told by a mentor of mine, a political mentor of mine, that the most important job of a politician is to listen. And so I have some thoughts and I'll share them with you to answer your question and other questions that may come. But I also look forward to this session because I hope it's an opportunity for me to hear from all of you, Mr. Charest, from the AIAC members, with ideas and suggestions as well for how we tackle those challenges that you outlined, Mr. Charest. Much has changed since the 2025 Vision 2025 report was tabled in June 2019, and we've since then Canada and all of us, the rest of the world, has been hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think it's fair to say that I think my colleagues in government recognize that the aerospace, the aviation industries, and workers are particularly affected by this pandemic. So there's a recognition of that challenge, that problem. As part of the COVID-19 response, there were a number of measures put in place to support businesses across sectors. So things like the emergency wage subsidy, the large employer emergency financing facility, business credit availability for smaller businesses. But I know that the conversation here is more about the sector-specific component of that and what can be done. I think it's fair to say that governments of all stripes have stood to support the Canadian aviation and aerospace workers. And I continue to advocate for that. That's why I agreed to be part of this caucus. And I know the government feels that way as well. I know that there are a couple of measures that have been taken specific to make sure that we truly understand the concerns, the challenges that the industry is facing right now. So Minister Baines launched the Industry Strategy Council to bring together leaders from the private sector, including those from advanced manufacturing and transportation, so that he can understand, so the government understands what the precise impact has been of COVID-19. And that's going to help us assess what those issues are and therefore what the solution should be. And I think more specifically on the aerospace front, Minister Baines approved a 9-month deferral of repayment obligations for legacy recipients in the repayment phase of some of the ISEC programs. So again, trying to assist in a targeted way the sector with that particular measure. But I think in terms of sector-specific measures, the focus right now is really understanding what the challenges are so that the appropriate support can be provided. I think as far as the Vision 2025 report goes, I think there are a number of components to that I hope we have a chance to get into today in this discussion. I think there's a number of measures that the government's try to take in response to that or to tackle some of those challenges. So, for example, as of 2019, $750 million in funding has been allocated to support the aerospace and space sectors through innovation programs. And that's meant to leverage about $10.5 billion in total project costs since 2015. Recently, under the Strategic Innovation Fund, the government announced $49 million for Aerospace Industries Association of Canada, so AIAC's initiative to help the aerospace industry accelerate the commercialization of new technology. And there's a number of other measures I could talk to, but I think what I'm trying to suggest here is that from my vantage point, I think even from the government's vantage point, my colleagues understand the aerospace industry has been hit hard. Parties of all stripes, governments of all stripes have supported the sector and will continue to do so. And right now the focus is on listening, bringing that panel of private sector leaders together to understand what the impacts are across a number of sectors, including aerospace, so that we can put together the appropriate response. But also to say that a number of things have been put in place, some of them in response to the 2025 report and some of them prior to that. And I look forward to continuing to champion those initiatives in the years to come. But I look forward to hearing from you, Mr. Charest, and the others on the call with suggestions and ideas as to what more we can do.
Well, thank you very much, Yvan. That, sets the table then for comments that your colleagues will also add. And I'll go now to Matt Jeneroux. Matt, you were re-elected in 2019, so congratulations. And you were elected in a previous campaign, so you're in your second mandate in the House of Commons and had several responsibilities as a critic. You've been the Shadow Minister for Infrastructure, Communities, Urban Affairs, Innovation, Science, and Economic Development, which attracted my attention because of the innovation component of the report that we tabled a year ago, and also of science, and Western economic diversification. So, and I know that you've had a special interest in the long-awaited space strategy also. So we look forward to hearing your remarks, and I'll turn the floor over to you, Matt.
Great, thanks, Mr. And thanks to my colleagues for taking the time to join us, which I think is a very important discussion that a lot of Canadians want to have right now, is the future of the aerospace sector. Forgive me, MP Baker, I didn't hear if there's a budget or not coming. I was hoping that perhaps we'd be able to hear that from you, but maybe we'll get into that later on in the call. Sorry, I do think this isn't a partisan issue. I think many of us believe in the aerospace sector, and we all want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to support it. And I think due to COVID and some of the comments made by you, Mr. Charest, are very much dominant in my email inbox, and I'm sure my colleagues' email inbox, on what the future of the sector means. For the course of about 3 or 4 months, we would easily get an email to 2 to 5 a day on just the amount of anger towards let's say the two major airlines, and what the hesitance to fly or to be up in the air. Just those are my constituents alone. Trying to then win that back, that support and levels is going to take time, but I think there's a number of the two major carriers are doing some work on that front. But from the manufacturing standpoint, I think is a really interesting story. And it sounded like we were in a bit of a difficult situation anyways when it came to, I was in Lunenburg, and they're saying the entire town would be decimated if certain measures didn't go through in that particular budget, in 2019's budget, which now we see even more so with the impacts of COVID. I had a call with Arn Pryor the other day, and similar situation, just again on the manufacturing front. What's the future hold here in Canada when there's other opportunities and other countries, particularly as reference, our neighbors to the south are doing a lot more to support the industry, or at least perception of supporting the industry than has happened here. So I think it's important to have the discussion. I think the big thing that would love to get to in at least if it's a throne speech, if it's a budget, whatever it is just that specific recognition for the aerospace sector. It's great to say it's under Minister Baines is looking at it and a bigger industry innovation strategy, but to really put the focus on an aerospace strategy and aerospace, even a mention in the throne speech, I think would go a very far away. And if there's any pressure that can continue to put on that from members on this call or members of Parliament, certainly open to hearing some of those thoughts. So I'll leave my comments there, Mr. Charest, but then looking forward to hearing some of the feedback throughout the rest of the call.
No, thank you very much. And Matt, this is an interesting time also for the opposition and the Conservative Party with a change of leadership. And it reminded me this morning that after we tabled the report well over a year ago, and during the federal election campaign that ensued, we did a panel in Toronto, and the representative of your party was Aaron O'Toole. So
right on top of things we are. There you go. He's now the leader.
The timing was impeccable. I'm now going to go to Alexandre Boulerice. Et Alexandre, je pense que vous étiez avec nous à Montréal lorsque nous avions fait le panel dans le cadre de la campagne électorale. J'en garde un très bon souvenir. Alexandre, you're the man standing in the province of Quebec for the NDP. Hey, don't feel alone. I've been in 1993. And look, I survived, right? And so we're delighted to have you with us today. And we're very interested in hearing your thoughts. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, M. Charret. Merci également pour l'invitation, l'initiative de cette réunion aujourd'hui, de ce caucus-là. J'aimerais beaucoup vous dire s'il va y avoir une mise à jour économique ou un budget cet automne. Malheureusement, les libéraux ne m'ont pas encore donné cette information-là. Je ne sais pas s'ils vont le faire non plus. Évidemment, nous, au NPD, on est des grands supporters de l'industrie aérospatiale, aéronautique depuis longtemps. Principalement, vous n'en serez pas surpris par les représentants de leurs travailleurs et travailleuses, que ce soit les machinistes ou Unifor, parce que c'est comme vous l'avez dit, des dizaines de milliers d'emplois et de bons emplois bien payés. Quand on parle de la classe moyenne, il y a beaucoup de gens là-dedans qui se retrouvent là. Et vous avez parfaitement raison, on a besoin d'une stratégie fédérale en aérospatiale. On a pris du retard par rapport aux autres pays dans le monde depuis des années. Et je pense que la pandémie fait en sorte qu'on a d'autant plus besoin d'une stratégie nationale. Ça a haussé le niveau d'urgence et de nécessité d'avoir cette stratégie-là. Like we talked about when we were together on the Montreal panel during the last federal election, Canada is one of the only countries that have a big aerospace sector without a national strategy. And the pandemic showed that we need that kind of strategy in partnership with the federal government much more than ever. So last time I thought we convinced Mr. Minister Garneau to the necessity of this strategy, but maybe he didn't have the chance or the opportunity to implement it. But next fall will be a good timing to do that. Good timing because it's a really deep crisis and we will really need to work together to pass through that crisis. Je suis assez inquiet en ce moment parce que dans la dernière année, probablement qu'on a réussi à continuer à fabriquer des avions parce qu'on était encore avec les carnets de commandes qui dataient de 2 ans, 3 ans, 4 ans. Avec le ralentissement du trafic aérien majeur qu'on voit en ce moment, qui a diminué certains mois de 90 %, peut-être qu'aujourd'hui, c'est 75 %. Je suis assez inquiet de comment on va être capable de maintenir les emplois puis l'industrie dans les 3, 4, 5 prochaines années. Parce qu'on a beau dire qu'il va peut-être avoir une reprise du trafic aérien importante en 2022 ou en 2023, mais il va y avoir un trou dans le carnet de commandes qui va avoir un impact sur plusieurs années à venir. Alors, comment le gouvernement fédéral peut être un partenaire pour passer à travers cette étape-là? Alors, non seulement, nous, ce qu'on dit, c'est qu'il faut avoir une stratégie fédérale ou une stratégie nationale sur le secteur aérospatial, mais il faut également avoir un plan de transition pour ces années-là. So, we need that strategy, but we need a transition program for the years to come where we will not be able to build planes because there will not be any companies will asked to have new planes. If, more than half of the people, our customers, are not flying anymore because of the pandemic or the consequences of the pandemic, we should invest in R&D and innovation. We should invest in training. We should invest in young workers. But a big part of that sector is to build planes. And if there's no companies asking for new planes, what we can do for the next a couple of years, maybe 5, say 6 years. So we need a transition program from the federal government for those years because there will be like a empty basket for a couple of years. So this is where our thoughts are, and c'est là-dessus qu'on veut travailler au NPD sur comment on peut garder le lien d'emploi de tous ces travailleurs-là qui fabriquent des avions ou qui fabriquent des pièces d'avion et qui n'auront pas de commandes, qui n'auront pas de carnet de commandes dans les prochaines années. Comment qu'on fait ça? C'est un immense défi, mais on ne veut pas perdre cette main-d'œuvre-là. Puis on ne veut pas perdre ces industries-là et ces entreprises-là. Voilà. Merci, M. Charret.
Merci beaucoup, Alexandre. Et je vais finalement aller vers Simon-Pierre Savard-Tremblay. Simon, c'est vous qui étiez avec nous à Montréal également. Est-ce que je me trompe?
Lors du débat en question, ce n'était pas moi. Là.
Ah, OK. Bon,
probablement mon collègue Gabriel Sainte-Marie.
C'est ça. Je vois Alexandre qui hoche la tête, c'est Gabriel Sainte-Marie.
Excusez-moi, mais vous m'avez entendu pareil parce que mon micro je viens de constater qu'il était levé. Vous m'avez entendu pareil? OK, parfait.
Oui, puis là, on vous entend encore mieux.
C'est encore mieux. Génial.
Vous saluerez votre collègue Gabriel. On en garde de bons souvenirs. Et pour vous aussi, c'est une première élection à la Chambre des communes. Alors, félicitations. Merci. Alors, vous avez, évidemment, parce que vous êtes au Québec, vous avez, je pense, une bonne idée du contour de l'industrie, à la fois au Québec et dans le reste du Canada. Voulez-vous nous donner une lecture de ce que vous voyez sur le terrain, puis en même temps, parlez-nous aussi, dans ce contexte, de ce que vous voyez pour l'avenir de l'industrie et de ce que le gouvernement fédéral, le rôle que devrait jouer le gouvernement fédéral. Merci, Simon.
Merci. Alors, je pense qu'il y a une chose qui est claire, personne ne le niera, surtout pas vous qui avez été premier ministre du Québec. C'est une industrie absolument fondamentale, absolument centrale. Non seulement il y a l'industrie en elle-même, mais il y a toute la grappe d'innovation, la grappe de recherche qui vient autour. Les emplois sont fondamentaux aussi, ceux qui s'y rattachent. Maintenant, il y a malheureusement, depuis les dernières années, il y a une espèce de dualité quand on parle au Québec de cette question-là. Il y a probablement du travail qui est à refaire. Quand on parle d'aérospatial, les gens sont fiers, mais quand on nomme le mot bombardier, qui est pourtant central à cette grappe-là, on dirait qu'il y a une espèce de traumatisme encore. On dirait que quand on mentionne ça, souvent, là, les gens vont se crisper immédiatement. Ça, à mon avis, il y aura un travail qui sera à faire par rapport à ça. Je veux pas revenir sur les raisons que tout le monde connaît autour de cette espèce de traumatisme bombardier-là, mais il y aura assurément quelque chose, probablement de la communication à faire là-dessus pour redorer le blason de cette entreprise qui qui sans doute n'a pas été un modèle dans les dernières années, mais qui néanmoins est un élément extrêmement important de l'économie québécoise. Maintenant aussi au niveau canadien, il n'y a pas la même culture qu'il y a au Québec par rapport à l'interventionnisme, par rapport au partenariat qu'on pourrait avoir avec une entreprise de ce genre-là. Dans le cas québécois, comme on le sait, il y a beaucoup de sièges sociaux. Depuis le Québec Inc. des années 80, il y a une intervention. Vous savez, M. Charest, vous connaissez probablement encore mieux que moi les rouages de l'État québécois, la caisse de dépôt, etc. Il y a une culture de l'intervention qu'il n'y a pas au Canada. Au Canada, où il y a beaucoup plus de succursales et où on dirait que dans la culture, on n'est pas habitué, mis à part peut-être les télécommunications, on n'est pas habitué à avoir des stratégies nationales, à avoir des stratégies de planification et autres. On pense, nous aussi, que ça s'impose, que ce soit pour les travailleurs ou d'ailleurs, il y a un défi au niveau de la précarité. Ça sera un enjeu extrêmement aussi important, la précarité des travailleurs de ce secteur-là. Mais il en faut bien entendu, une stratégie fédérale d'ensemble. Sinon, je réfléchis tout à l'heure, vous parliez d'avions carboneutres, ça serait effectivement un bel objectif qu'on partage absolument. Maintenant, il y avait un avion qui était très, très peu polluant, qui était celui de la C-Series. C'est extrêmement dommage qu'on l'ait perdu. Néanmoins, c'est encore trop tôt pour dire si la vente à Airbus était fondamentalement une mauvaise décision. Surtout que là, avec la COVID, ça a l'air d'aller mal partout, donc c'est vraiment pas évident de dire est-ce qu'il y a un endroit que ça va mieux que l'autre, est-ce que des décisions se prennent mieux que l'autre. Tout le monde est en train de gérer les pertes, tout le monde est en train de gérer les difficultés. Donc, c'est vraiment pas le moment de pouvoir tirer des bilans de tout ça, malheureusement. Mais dans l'ensemble, c'était quand même un beau modèle. Là, avec le fait que les avions sont cloués au sol, c'est effectivement un défi. Il va falloir qu'il y ait de l'aide attitrée à ce secteur-là, une transition véritablement vers la plupart des idées qui sont abordées ici, c'est-à-dire une stratégie d'ensemble, c'est-à-dire aussi une stratégie de transition écologique du secteur. Donc, il y aura beaucoup de chantiers qui seront à mettre en place. Je vais m'arrêter là, pas que ça tourne en monologue, mais je suis convaincu qu'il y aura de beaux échanges dans les prochaines minutes.
Simon, ce que vous dites, c'est très intéressant. Et quand vous parlez de plusieurs chantiers, là, vous mettez le doigt dessus. C'est pas les occasions qui nous manquent actuellement pour aller vers de nouveaux projets. Simon talked about one thing you talked about, Simone. I'll switch into English a bit so we can also reach the broadest audience here on workers. In the tour we did, the national tour, we met with every provincial government, Fitzgibbons in Quebec at the time, and even Premier Doug Ford and Vic Fedeli, the Minister of Economic Development. And in every single province, we also made the point that provincial governments have a very key role to play, especially in the regards to workers training, because it's mostly their jurisdiction. And of the recommendations we put in the report was a coordination of co-op placements, things that need to be done for experienced workers. Les travailleurs d'expérience, on appelait autrefois les travailleurs âgés, ça n'existe plus. Mais il y a des gestes à poser, il y a des politiques à mettre en place qui sont pleins de bon sens, à la fois pour les travailleurs, mais pour les industries, pour le gouvernement, pour soutenir le travail et permettre d'en faire plus, incluant les centres de formation, including national training centers. So these are all issues that make sense by themselves. But I want to point that out because it isn't just the federal government. It's also the provinces. And everywhere we went during the national consultations, the provinces recognize that. And they're ready to come to the table. I know that for a fact. But they need a signal from the federal government on whether or not that's the direction in which we're going. Yvan, I'm going to return to you, and you've had an opportunity to hear your colleagues on this, and there may be things that you want to add to the comments that you made or respond to. So please, the floor is yours, Yvan. And colleagues, if you want to just jump in after that, will be fine, and then we'll turn it over to a few questions. Yvan?
Okay, thank you. No, and I think as much that my colleagues spoke to that I would agree with. I think Simon-Pierre's point about the global community has been hit by COVID-19, and it's something that everyone's taking stock of what that impact has been, from a health to economic and of course on various industries, including aerospace. So, and I think that if you want to, I come from a background in management consulting before I was elected to office, worked for a company called Boston Consulting Group. And one of the things that I learned through management consulting was that it's critical that you are very, very, you are deliberate about identifying and articulating the problem so that you can be able to solve it effectively. And so it's fine to say we need a strategy to support the sector. I don't think anyone disagrees that we need to support the sector, but the how is the question. And so this point that I think Simon-Pierre was making, not in those words, but somewhat differently, around the need to take stock and to assess the impact is so important. So I wanted to sort of reiterate the importance of that so that we do solve the problem in a way that's sustainable, in a way that actually addresses the challenges that the industry is facing. And keeping in mind that, as an MP, and I'm sure my colleagues would agree with this too, whether it's in our email inbox or through meetings that have been requested of us, I'm being lobbied by dozens and dozens of businesses or industry associations in various sectors, and they too need help. And so I think one of the things we need to look at from a government perspective, whether it's provincial or federal, is to make sure that we think about what we can do that will address the issues that cut across some of the sectors as well. And so I think we have to be just very thoughtful about how we put in place those measures. So not taking anything away from the need to act, not at all. I don't want that to be the message. We do need to act, but I think the how is the big question. And to do that, we need to really be clear about what those impacts have been on all the workers in the diverse aspects of the aerospace industry, because it is a diverse sector with large companies and some smaller businesses as well. And also thinking about how some of the challenges that you're facing also cut across sectors, and how some of the aid we may need to be provided in other sectors as well. So those are a couple of thoughts that kind of stem from the discussion that we heard there. In terms of the budget, I'll just say, Matt, and to others, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I'm not going to be able to make an announcement about the budget here today, but I do think that the throne speech was mentioned. And I think that there's, I'll make a broad statement about the throne speech. The throne speech that was delivered when the last parliament was formed was delivered under very different circumstances. And so this allows the government to really re-articulate a little bit of its vision for the next coming years. So I've heard the suggestion about the mention of the aerospace sector. I think it was Matt who suggested it. I've heard that suggestion. But I welcome thoughts, whether it's in this forum today from all of you, or to contact me directly and to hear thoughts from members of AIAC, from my colleagues, from Mr. Charest, as to what else needs to be in that throne speech, what else needs to be in that budget, whenever it may come, to make sure tangibly, very in specific terms, to help the aerospace sector. Because I want to help, that's why I'm part of this caucus, but I also need help in figuring out what those specific items.
Thank you, Yvan. I want to offer your colleagues a chance also to make some additional comments, but I want to ask you a question. Are there things that the industry needs to do, or the workers or the unions, to be able to bring their message to the government side? Are there things that come to mind that you think that we need to do better, more effectively? Is it calling up the members of Parliament, meeting with them, or because we do want to put all the chances on our side? We do think, by the way, that the speech from the throne is a great opportunity, and the timing is right. I mean, there's the convergence of a whole host of events put us in an extraordinary situation where we need to focus on growth, and so we do feel we fit right into that, but. Maybe there's things that we're missing. Are there things that we should be doing, Yvan, that would be helpful in supporting you and talking to your colleagues about the importance of this industry?
I appreciate the question, Mr. Charest. I think that from my vantage point, I think the more I hear from members of a community, in this case, the aerospace community, whether it's workers or businesses, and the more I hear consistent messages, the more helpful to me. So that would be the more that, whether it's workers or members of the unions or people like yourself or others on this call, can communicate that to their local members of parliament, a consistent message or a consistent set of messages in terms of what they believe is needed. I think that would be helpful, because I think what it'll do is it'll help give us confidence that those issues that you've raised are the ones that are truly the ones that are needed. Those solutions are the ones that are truly needed to solve the problems that we've discussed here today, that the sector is facing. But also it engages members of parliament who aren't on this call here today, and other decision makers and influencers who can help move that along. So if there was something that that could be done, that would be my suggestion. But I'd be curious to hear what my colleagues think about that.
Thank you, Yvan. I want to offer either Matt or Alexandre or Simon an opportunity, and I see Alexandre. Do you want to add something? Allez-y, Alexandre.
Merci, Monsieur Baker. The NDP, we are in favor in general of something we could call a Buy Canada Act. And, previously in the meeting, Mr. Charest, you talked about the procurement. And I don't know if it is the answer, but maybe it's a part of the answer. Civil aviation will have some difficulties and challenges for the next years. Maybe in the short term, the answer could also be procurements and, turning a little bit more to defense. It's not in our DNA to ask for an increase in military spending, but we are already spending a lot. And we know that we will have to buy new fighters in the coming years, and we're already a little bit late about that. So how can we work together to be sure that if those planes are not built in Canada, that parts of those planes or pieces, we would make sure that a percentage or a part of the plane will be built in Canada? That could be an answer in short term to maintain those jobs that civil aviation will not be able to maintain in the next years.
Alexandre, you make a very interesting point that we gave some thought to in the report that we tabled over a year ago. And in that report, it's not so much a Buy America as Buy Canada, as we put it in these words, Buy for Canada. And a Buy for Canada, we wanted it to be a larger concept that recognizes that our industry, 80% of what we do is exported. So we do want open markets. But let's try to be intelligent about how we manage our defense procurement. And I thought it was interesting that you would add, it's not because the NDP is a war machine who thinks that we should be going into, military adventures, but we all are taxpayers and we know that some defense capacity is part of sovereignty of a country and we're going to have to invest the money, including in the North, including, our ability to be a sovereign country depends on that ability. So the Buy for Canada, in other words, and I couldn't agree with you more. Let's be intelligent about how we do it. And how can we allow that to trickle down to SMEs? And it won't happen unless we want it to happen. We have to design policies that give those SMEs a chance and a break to have access to those procurements. Otherwise, it doesn't happen easily because the procurement process is designed in such a way where it goes to the big contractors, not the smaller ones. We have to have the smaller ones incorporated in that process, be able to make it happen. So Buy for Canada, I think for us was a good way of expressing it. Are there other interventions? I see Matt, go right ahead.
Yeah, thanks. And, Yvan's in a tough spot. He's a government MP and he has to basically sit here and defend government or I guess the throne speech or take a lot of that feedback. But I do think it's incumbent upon all of us members of Parliament to really take these messages forward. The message that Mr. Charest, you raised at the beginning, the age, why is it so high of 54 years old in the sector? To me, the aerospace sector, and one of the reasons I got involved in the caucus, is it's an exciting sector. There's space, there's domestic air travel, everything that we do as a member of Parliament from. I come from Alberta, so I'm on an airplane 8 hours every week, and I think it's an exciting sector. So why is it at the age of 54 is such a high age? I think the opportunity and something that could potentially fit well with this particular government's narrative is that to reach out into the STEM sector and particularly young women involved in the sector. We see a significant support for the STEM sector right now from all levels of government, really. But when it comes to getting young girls involved in an exciting sector like this, we know that young girls leave the STEM sector, usually around junior high school. Being able to continue to make that an exciting field for them. And, selfishly, I'm a dad of two young girls just entering junior high, and I want them to enter a sector like an aerospace sector that will succeed for many years to come. The last thing, just want to quickly mention some of the comments. Reminds me about some of the provincial jurisdiction. And here in Alberta, there's an MLA, Richard Godfrey, passed the Strategic Aviation Advisory Council Act. And it's interesting at a provincial level to really provide that much focus on the aviation industry. But once I started reading the particular act, it makes a lot of sense. to have a dedicated council to sit and look at how the industry impacts provinces. I'm not sure to what extent other provinces have done something similar, but certainly it's, from my perspective as a supporter of the aerospace industry, is a step in the right direction, and perhaps there's opportunity for more of that from other provinces to step up as well.
Well, Matt, I find that to be very interesting. And tell me if I'm wrong. Didn't Premier Kenney in his Alberta plan, delivered only a few weeks ago or a month and a half ago, there was a part in aerospace in that, was there not, Matt?
Yeah, you're right, there was a brief mention of that. So I think, again, getting back to the throne speech, that's a tremendous opportunity to be able to provide some of that, just support for the aerospace sector. Yep. And I think all of us can probably advocate for some of that.
Well, Matt, this is, what comes to mind listening to you on this is that this environment is probably a good opportunity for us to get rid of the old cassette about the aerospace industry and look at it for what it is for the future. And, some folks think the aerospace industry is just about Quebec when it's not. I mean, it's every part of the country, including Alberta. I mean, one of the companies that has the most momentum now in Canada is Viking Air out of British Columbia, and who bought some of the planes and the rights to produce planes from Bombardier, and Alberta, whether it's Winnipeg, Alberta. I mean, this industry is in every single part of the country. Simon-Pierre talked earlier about Bombardier a while ago. I mean, Bombardier has received loans that they reimbursed when I was premier, and we made money out of it. But we can't replay the same old cassettes. And Alberta should have a solid piece of this industry. There's no reason why it should not. And we need to, and everyone should applaud that and help make that happen. So you can count on us to help that. You talked to provincial associations, by the way. They're very strong throughout the country. I saw Suzanne Benoit on our line. Suzanne represents the Quebec industry, which is very active and do a great job. So we should connect them together. But that piece of legislation you mentioned, I have not read, and I want to read it. So I'm going to look it up, and unless you just want to shoot it over to me, and I'll be delighted to read it because I think that's worth taking time to update on that. It's very good news coming from Alberta. Simon-Pierre, we're soon going to go to a few questions by the audience in the industry. But Simon-Pierre, est-ce que vous vouliez ajouter quelque chose? Anything that you want to add? Go right ahead.
Ben, je pense aussi que de façon générale, puis là, je réfléchis à haute voix un petit peu avec vous autres, là, il va falloir une stratégie peut-être plus serrée au niveau de la protection des fleurons, justement. Puis ça, on parle de l'aérospatial, mais ça touche évidemment un paquet d'autres secteurs également. Est-ce que la loi sur Investissement Canada, dans sa forme actuelle, est suffisante? Ça sera peut-être à réfléchir par rapport à ça aussi.
Pardon, ça veut dire les gouvernements partout dans le monde, en passant, ont resserré les règles pour l'investissement étranger. And our governments all over the world, as a consequence of this pandemic, it started in Australia, but France has done it, Europe is doing it, Germany and Canada has also, the present government has announced some restrictions on foreign investment. And I guess what's behind this is a pretty basic concern. A lot of governments are worried that interests that are not aligned with their national interest will scoop up companies at rock bottom prices and just walk away with them. And so it's short term because it is protectionist. It is. And in the case of Canada, keep in mind, we're a country that depends heavily on foreign direct investment. We depend on it. We just want it to be done in a way that's consistent with our national interest, which is fine. Everyone does that. And I think we've done it fairly well. Mais vous avez pas tort, Simon-Pierre, tous les pays en ce moment gardent l'œil là-dessus et sont plus vigilants qu'ils l'étaient avant parce qu'ils craignent que des intérêts non alignés, appelons-le comme ça, là, achètent des compagnies qui sont canadiennes, domestiques, et qui les exploitent d'une façon qui soit pas dans l'intérêt national. Alors voilà. I'm going to, Mike, I think we're going to slowly turn it over to you because we have about half an hour left of what we scheduled, and there may be some questions from our membership of the AIAC. So if it's okay, I'll turn it over to you and you share the questions with us.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Mr. Charest, and thank you to the four members of Parliament for that interesting discussion. We're getting a lot of questions coming in here, but maybe I think Mr. Baker had talked about the deferral of payments and some of the things that have been implemented. And we want to definitely thank the government for that deferral of payment. That's something AIC was pushing for. Also, the emergency wage subsidy was very beneficial to our industry and the 215,000 workers that we employ. Some of the impacts, I believe one of the members of parliament had asked about, we did a bit of a survey early in the COVID-19 crisis, and we found that 97% of our industry had either shut down partially or had layoffs. And we expect to see much more. So the impact is there, and it's very real. And we've even had government economists come before us and reemphasize that our industry is one of the most hardest hit. One of the stats that stuck out to me from some of the consultants was for every month that aerospace is down, it takes about a year for us to recover. So we have a long road ahead of us. And so one of the questions I have here from the members is, what are you hearing, number one? And I know, Mr. Jeneroux, you had mentioned, speaking to some companies, and how can we as companies, particularly small businesses, what can we expect over the long term from either the government or your party? And so maybe, I don't know how we want to go here, if somebody would like to jump in on that particular question.
I can jump in quickly. In terms of probably the big elephant in the room from our party is I think we're a week into a new leader. So it's certainly there's not a lot that I guess to announce here to the group. But I think just on some of the points that you raised, Mike, the continuing advocacy of the sector, having whether it's one organization reach out to us and share their story makes for a much more powerful message for us to go back to Parliament or to call up MP Baker and say, hey, this is what we're hearing as well, and making sure that the whole story of the industry is told, because the National Post and Globe Mail will always cover the big airlines every time, and anytime we're seeing a lot of stories now about just the anger with refunding of tickets or whatnot. But I think there's a bigger story to be told in the aerospace sector, and certainly something we want to hear those stories.
Perfect. Thank you. Mr. Baker?
Sure. So I agree with what Matt just said. I think this is a similar question to the one that Mr. Charest asked me a few moments ago in terms of how we can do more, how we can help. So I won't repeat everything I said, but I think in a nutshell, the more consistent message here from various corners of the sector, workers, businesses, the large players, but also the SMEs, I think the more engaged you're going to have the influencers and decision makers leading into budgets and other decision milestones. But I think also the more confidence we're going to have that those suggestions that you're bringing are representative of the needs of the full sector. And I think that's really important as MPs, that we know that when we're acting, and whether we're amending regulations or investing taxpayer dollars, we know that we're covering the needs of the sector broadly. That's really, I think, why we're all here is to help the sector be successful, and the workers and the businesses that are part of that sector be successful. So those would be my suggestions as to how to move forward. The only other suggestion I would make is that the more from my vantage point, the more specifics, the better. And so I think we're all in agreement that there's a challenge that the sector faces, especially post COVID-19. I think we all acknowledge its importance. I think we're all on the same page while we're all here. But what are those solutions and that tackle those various components of the value chain across the sector, different size companies within the sector? That would be helpful.
Excellent. Thank you. Mr. Boulerice or Mr. Savard-Tremblay, any comment?
Je vous dirais rapidement que l'angle avec lequel nous, on va approcher ces questions-là, c'est vraiment le maintien puis la création d'emplois au Québec puis au Canada en général. C'est-à-dire qu'on est d'accord que de l'aide publique, qu'il y a un partenariat avec le gouvernement fédéral, qu'il y a une stratégie nationale sur l'aérospatiale, mais il faut qu'en retour, il y ait des garanties que les emplois vont rester ici, dans les grandes compagnies, mais aussi dans les PME, évidemment, qui font partie de la chaîne d'approvisionnement des plus grandes compagnies pour la fabrication. Mais on ne veut pas signer un chèque en blanc non plus. Il faut qu'il y ait des garanties du secteur qu'il y a du maintien d'emplois et de la création d'emplois ici.
If I can, Mike et Alexandre, on ne peut pas être plus d'accord avec vous. La transparence va être très importante là-dessus. Et quand il y a un soutien et que c'est des fonds publics, qu'on soit clair sur les attentes et sur les résultats de part et d'autre. Alors là-dessus, soyons clairs là, au point de départ. Je voulais revenir sur une idée que vous avez exprimée tantôt. I think you mentioned that the NDP would like to maybe table legislation about Buy Canada as exists for Buy America. And our concept was Buy for Canada. And you are more than welcome to steal the idea. One of the virtues in politics is steal good ideas. Take full credit of it. Matt, are you listening to me?
Simon-Pierre, steal good ideas, take credit for it. I can see you're taking notes. Buy for Canada in the aerospace industry. Mike, over to you.
Buy for the benefit of Canada. Absolutely. Mr. Savard-Tremblay, any comments on the original question?
Ben écoutez, tout à fait aussi d'accord avec l'approche de la protection, des garanties. D'ailleurs, dans une intervention récemment en Chambre pendant l'été, c'était une des choses que j'avais demandé au ministre de l'Industrie, qu'il y ait une garantie, qu'il y ait des conditions, qu'il y ait une garantie de protection des emplois pour pas qu'il y ait de fuite. Je vous parlais tout à l'heure d'un des problèmes qui est celui de la précarité, parce que l'absence de sécurité d'emploi dans plusieurs secteurs est une réelle plaie, est un réel problème par rapport à l'industrie de l'aérospatiale. Et véritablement, ça sera une direction, ça serait assurément une difficulté sur laquelle il faudra se pencher dans une éventuelle politique d'ensemble dans le domaine que, je le rappelle, nous favorisons également.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that. Just one of the observations, at some point, COVID-19 is going to end. And once it ends, we need industries such as aerospace that's going to contribute to the recovery and move on. And that's really why we need the support, which what we're seeking for today. So one of the other questions is here, regarding a sector strategy, the issue for the industry is that we're hearing that this is not potentially where the government is going. And every day we hear government working with different stakeholders, industries, on specific programs for this industry, that industry. We have the Industry Sectoral Council that doesn't have dedicated aerospace representation to it. So we're getting frustrated. And how do we get that action to get that sector strategy? And again, going back to my earlier observations, how do we ensure that aerospace is positioned well coming out of the recovery? With 80% of our output export related, I think we are uniquely positioned to help contribute to that recovery. So maybe I'll start with you, Mr. Boulerice, if you have some thoughts on that.
Oui, je vous dirais rapidement que peut-être c'est vrai qu'il y a d'autres secteurs économiques ou industriels où on a l'impression qu'on connaît mieux un peu les employés, les travailleurs, les travailleuses. Il y a eu beaucoup de campagnes de publicité dans les dernières années qui nous parlaient, par exemple, le secteur laitier, par exemple. Les agriculteurs sont assez agressifs là-dessus pour faire connaître leur profession, leur travail et les résultats que ça donne à la société. J'ai l'impression que peut-être auprès du grand public, un manque de connaissance de la réalité des gens qui fabriquent des pièces d'avion, des gens qui sont des ingénieurs, des gens qui conçoivent des avions, qui font de la recherche et développement en aéronautique. Il y a peut-être là quelque chose à faire pour juste, au-delà de dire qu'il y a 200 000 emplois, mais de présenter le visage des gens qui travaillent là et leur contribution à l'économie de leur communauté et l'économie québécoise ou canadienne en général.
Excellent. Thank you. Mr. Jeneroux?
Yeah, I think you're right, Mike. There's a tremendous opportunity after COVID for the aerospace sector, and largely because right now we're seeing a lot of tourism, the rubber tire market tourism, here in Alberta, encouraging people to drive to whether it be the mountains or into interior BC. Come next year, come the following year, once we do see back to whatever's somewhat sense of normal is, there's going to be a lot of appetite for support for this sector, a lot of travel pickup. If your facts are true about 1 month equals 1 year, we're now going on what must be about 8 years in terms of getting back to where we were. However, I think there's going to be just such a desire to take that trip to Europe right now that you can't take that trip to Hawaii, Mexico, from us on the West Coast here. I think there's going to be a lot of that interest to do that, and making sure that the aerospace sector is supported so they have that opportunity to really, when that desire does come back, the aerospace sector is ready to meet that desire.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Jeneroux. Mr. Savard-Tremblay, any comments?
Écoutez, je vois le temps avancer, puis je voudrais pas répéter ce que l'ensemble de mes collègues ont dit, donc je saute ce tour. Vous voyez que ça me semble quand même l'idée globale, l'idée de la politique globale y est, l'idée de l'observation des emplois y est également. Donc, écoutez, je veux pas prolonger inutilement ce tour-là.
Excellent, thank you. And Mr. Baker, just to respond on that need for a strategy, and we see all of our competitor nations going down that road.
Yeah, and I think it's a very fair question. I mean, I think to recap, if we look back at what the government's approach has been, because the question was about the government's approach going forward. And I think, and I'll be, to be fully frank, I don't know what the government's approach will be. I think the government's truly listening and trying to take stock of the challenge that the sector's facing, other sectors are facing, like I said earlier, and then develop a strategy to solve that. But I think the question about sector-specific strategy is very, very fair. I think we're all aligned on the fact, we're all in agreement on the fact that the sector is facing challenges. It faced challenges before COVID-19. It's facing additional challenges now, that it needs the government support. And you certainly have my commitment to make sure that the government helps to solve those problems. But as far as whether that means a sector-specific approach and why, or is the government going to take one, and why isn't the indication that's doing one yet? I would say that the reason is that because I think the government just hasn't decided as to how it wants to approach this. I think the focus originally in response to COVID-19 was to be sector agnostic, to support businesses across the board. So we talked about the wage subsidy, we talked about other programs to provide credit. Those were designed to help businesses across the economy. And I think now it's let's assess the problems with the input of people from all sectors. There was a mention in the question about the fact that the aerospace sector isn't represented, although, and I'm happy to have a discussion further with you on this or offline on this. There is an advanced manufacturing roundtable panel. There's transportation that's represented as well. But if there's a better way to hear those voices, I'm happy to hear that feedback. But the intent here is to certainly make sure that it's an inclusive process, hear, understand what the challenges are, and then come up with a response that's thoughtful. And I think, we heard on this in our discussion here today, some of my colleagues have mentioned some very important topics, and they've made some excellent suggestions. One of those suggestions was, the protection of employment. If we're going to support the sector, how do we protect employment for the workers? And I personally support that. I think that's important. But again, that's not something that we can turn around quickly. It has to be thoughtfully done. And if we provide support in a certain aspect of the aerospace sector, are there other aspects that will need support? Are there other sectors that will need support that affect our families and our economy and across the country? So I think that's what the government's trying to do, is figure out how do we tackle all these problems that the aerospace but other sectors are facing in a thoughtful way that makes the most of our taxpayer dollars, but helps us seize that opportunity that Matt was talking about, which we have in the throne speech in the budget.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Mr. Baker, for that perspective. And we just want to thank you for your interest in your internal advocacy. You've been a strong champion for our sector, and we definitely thank you. On the Industry Sectoral Council, we have put in a submission, and we are making representations there, and it's been greatly appreciated, the back and forth we've had there. I just want to turn to, I have a question I'm going to combine a couple here, just cognizant of the time, on the defense procurement. And I need to be very clear that as an industry that exports 80% of what our output is, we need to be very careful on the issue of protectionism, and that's definitely not what we're going for. And I would just encourage folks to go to our website to see the position specific to the buy for the benefit of Canada, because it's a very good one, as Mr. Charest said, but there's some nuance there that I wouldn't want to get lost here. One of the questions that I have here is with respect to defense procurement, and maybe I'll combine it here. I think Mr. Charest had mentioned it earlier in his remarks that some of the countries, what we're seeing is they're expediting some of the defense procurement pieces because it's a way to inject some cash into the system. And so I'd be interested in hearing everyone's thoughts on that. We're seeing some challenges specifically on the space front. And then is there a way through that, combining some questions here, to help support small and medium-sized businesses and any sort of policy tweaks there? So maybe I'll open that up if there's somebody that wants to kick it off. Maybe Mr. Savard-Tremblay, if you could kick that question off for us. Thank you.
Donc, si j'ai bien compris les questions des PME, de comment les soutenir, c'est évidemment assez fondamental parce que nous, dans le cas du Québec, des PME en aéronautique, il y en a plus de 200. Un des défis, je crois, parce que même si on regarde ça, dans un rayon d'à peu près 100 km autour de Montréal, on peut construire un véhicule aérospatial d'à peu près de A à Z. On a tout. On manque de rien. Puis il y a très, très peu de régions dans le monde qui peuvent se targuer d'avoir la même capacité en la matière. Donc, je crois qu'un des défis par rapport à ces PME-là, que je répète, il y en a plus de 200, c'est qu'on les aide à s'intégrer finalement dans la chaîne de production des donneurs d'ordre comme Airbus, comme Bell Hélicoptère, comme Pratt & Whitney et évidemment Bombardier. Puis dans un tel contexte, je crois que rendu là, il sera très, très difficile de perdre nos activités. Et puis, mais évidemment, le Québec a été affaibli par le rachat de certains morceaux de Bombardier par des entreprises étrangères. On en parlait tout à l'heure. Puis, M. Charest, vous disiez vous-même qu'on a tout intérêt à être peut-être plus restrictif par rapport à l'investissement étranger, surtout depuis la crise, qui nous a montré certains dangers être trop dépendants de marchés extérieurs. Mais aussi, regardons néanmoins du côté du Canada. On peut dire cependant que les filiales sont relativement malheureusement assez peu innovantes et c'est là aussi l'intérêt d'une politique d'ensemble, d'une politique fédérale en la matière. Là.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Mr. Savard-Tremblay. Mr. Baker, would you like to respond to that?
Certainly. Which part of it?
Just on the expedization of defense procurement and space procurement, and is that a way that we could perhaps inject some of those funds into the ecosystem, if you will?
My personal view is that as a government, and I felt this way when I was in provincial government as well, where a tremendous amount of procurement was being done. In the provincial context, it tends to be more around healthcare and transportation. And in the federal case, it's a little bit different. But in the case of defense, just as in the case of those other examples I just mentioned, I'm a big believer that the government, provincial and federal governments, should be buying Canadian if at all possible. And I think that's important for a number of reasons. I think it's important because in the vast majority of cases, we can procure what we need here in Canada. I think when we see increased protectionist politics from around the world, where administrations and governments are encouraging their own governments or mandating their own governments buy local, buy within their country, I think we need to take stock of that and realize the impact that's having on our exporters and our industries and make sure that we're supporting them the way we can. And I think it has obviously the obvious economic implications that to the extent that we're making large procurement arrangements, that we can have a significant positive effect on our domestic economy, whether in aerospace or elsewhere, if we're buying Canadian wherever possible. So I'm a buy Canadian wherever possible. That's my philosophy and approach. So that's what I would apply to this issue as well.
Yeah, we have a number of procurement files that are pending, and we need to see those continue through. And within those, there's always a strong benefit for Canada. Absolutely. Mr. Boulerice, and then maybe we'll go to you, Mr. Jeneroux.
Quite quickly, when I was first elected member of parliament, was almost 10 years ago, and there was already a sense of urgency to replace the CF-18. It's been 10 years, it's not been done. So I don't know if it's spending more rapidly in that case, but, I think it's something that is coming. And I completely agree with the suggestion of your members, that we should maybe speed up a little bit some investments and some projects. And about space investments, I think it's a really good idea. Last time I checked, there's no COVID in space.
and just on the space file, we've seen the need for reliable broadband internet, and I think a lot of times when people think space, they think Lunar Gateway, which is all great programs too, but it's that connectivity piece which is pretty key, and I think COVID-19 has really bring that to the forefront. Mr. Jeneroux, any comments? And then I have one more question to maybe round this out.
I'll just be quick. I'm curious how Mr. Boulerice checked about COVID in space. Curious how he got up there. Take me with you next time. The conversation about the space strategy, I think, is important because this is Mr. Charest was right. I was our party's industry critic, I think about 2.5, 3 years ago. Now I'm our party's health critic now, and there's still no space strategy. It's left. There's been a lot of assumptions that we're going to get a space strategy. Mr. Baines, I believe at one point when I was a critic, said, wait 6 months, Matt, we'll get a space strategy. It's been a lot longer than 6 months. I think now would be a great time, particularly if you look at the economic boost that would be provided if we opened up that sector, to young recruits. Again, I think you'd be able to do a lot, kill a few birds with one stone with some of those, if we're able to open that up. So I'll leave my comments there because I know we're running out of time.
Thank you for that, Mr. Jeneroux. One of the things that I would echo is that on the national strategy piece, it's got to address defense, civil aviation or aerospace, and then also defense. And I agree on a space strategy, having something fully costed would definitely be appreciated. One of the last questions here that I'll pose, given we are not expecting manufacturing to suddenly improve in today's environment before the flying market returns, companies are simply trying to hang on to the workforce they have today, let alone train or hire future employees, where, 8 months ago we were in a bit of a labor crunch. The key support to industry today should include capital funding to allow introduction of new capabilities, to expand product portfolios, and to upskill current workforces. This funding should be far better than commercial terms. Such a support would also attract foreign investment. Any feedback to that recommendation from one of the members? And maybe I'll start with you, Mr. Baker, and then go from there.
I'll be brief. I mean, I've taken note of those suggestions. I think those are the kinds of suggestions that are really helpful to me anyway. I think we were chatting earlier about how the sector could be most helpful is, for me, would be with specific suggestions like that. And that's helpful. So I've taken note of that. My view is that whatever solution the government brings forward, whatever package of measures has to combine to address the range of issues that the sector is facing. And so those two could certainly be part of it. I certainly recognize the capital intensive nature of the sector. So I can appreciate why that would be helpful. And I can certainly, we've talked about it on this call already, the importance of making sure that we're attracting and strengthening the talent base within the sector, because that's critical really to sustainable competitive advantage in the sector. So I've taken note of that for the time being.
Excellent. Perfect. Mr. Jeneroux?
I think that goes back to a lot of the same points that Mr. Baker and the rest of us have been making in terms of making sure to advocate, the sector advocating for that type of awareness. We get, Mr. Charest can attest to this, we get lobbied a lot from a lot of different sectors, but to make sure that we're hearing those opportunities to support that foreign investment here in Canada from within the aerospace sector, I think is important. So continue to reach out and call either your local member of parliament, inundate Mr. Baker with a bunch of his email as well, but us as well. Please continue to push for the sector.
Excellent. Thank you. Mr. Savard-Tremblay?
Alors, écoutez, il va sans dire, je crois que cette pandémie-là, puis si on parle notamment au niveau du Québec, on a un paquet d'expertise qui pourrait facilement être exporté, qui pourrait facilement bénéficier au reste du monde, et l'aérospatiale en est une. Donc oui, des investissements capitaux. J'ai entendu le mot green dans la tournure de la question également. Donc je pense qu'il va sans dire que maintenant, la relance, elle sera verte. Je pense qu'il y a personne qui va être en désaccord avec ça. On peut pas réenvisager une relance qui soit autrement qu'écologique. Donc, ça devrait même être une condition. Il devrait y avoir des exigences très serrées là-dessus. Donc, il va sans dire qu'au niveau de l'innovation, mais il faut savoir aussi que dans le cas québécois, l'innovation, elle est quand même déjà relativement au rendez-vous. Pour répéter un petit peu certains éléments que j'avais donné un petit peu précédemment, c'est que dans la région très élargie de Montréal, on peut déjà construire un avion de A à Z. Donc, et puis je vous parlais aussi tout à l'heure de la grappe d'innovation, de la grappe de recherche qui est étroitement liée à l'industrie en elle-même. Donc, il va sans dire qu'en cette matière, des investissements pour soutenir cette industrie-là vont s'imposer, éviter la perte de vitesse qui pourrait être extrêmement dangereuse pour nous. Notre industrie est réellement menacée. Mais maintenant, je crois que c'est aussi assez évident que le besoin en matière d'innovation est beaucoup plus criant dans le reste du Canada qu'au Québec, mais que le Québec, bien entendu, serait bénéficiaire si le reste du Canada, où il trouvera assurément beaucoup de partenaires, pouvait bénéficier de ces investissements opportunistes, comme vous disiez, M. Charest.
Merci, Simon-Pierre. I think we wanted to go to Alexandre, Mike. Is that it?
I think so, yes, to round it out.
Merci beaucoup. Écoutez, si ma vidéo ne fonctionne plus parce que mon téléphone est en train de mourir, c'est des choses qui arrivent en temps de conférence Zoom. Je vous dirais simplement que oui, en fait, une crise est aussi une occasion, hein, et je pense que c'est une occasion à saisir en ce moment d'investissement en recherche et développement, nouvelles technologies, innovation. Moi, je pense beaucoup à cette crise actuelle-là comme une occasion inespérée de faire des changements fondamentaux en ce qui concerne l'environnement puis la lutte au changement climatique. Mais c'est vrai que ça peut aussi être approprié pour le secteur aérospatial. Et notamment en ce qui concerne la formation professionnelle et mise en place d'expertise dans des centres de recherche ou alors dans des ingénieurs extrêmement qualifiés. C'est une industrie qui ne dépend pas d'une matière première propre au Québec ou au Canada ou alors une force de travail brute ou à bon marché, mais plutôt dans la qualité de nos cerveaux et la qualité de nos ressources humaines. Et si on n'investit pas là-dedans, entre autres, on va perdre quelques avantages compétitifs qu'on peut avoir en ce moment. Alors, oui, prendre des risques pour amener des capitaux supplémentaires, mais surtout pour être capable de faire en sorte que les 60 à 80 000 ingénieurs que la Chine produit à toutes les années soient pas meilleurs que nos ingénieurs ou notre main-d'œuvre dans les entreprises.
Thank you for that. Maybe I'll just say a few words, Mr. Charest, and then I'll let you close it out. We just really want to thank the four of you for the time that you've given us. We understand COVID-19 is a very busy time, and we thank you for your engagement with us and your continued engagement and support for our industry, or us, all four parties. It's greatly appreciated. On behalf of our full membership and the 215,000 workers that they represent, we just wanted to thank you very much. And Mr. Charest, maybe I'll turn it over to you for a few last-minute words.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you to the whole team at AIAC for putting on this webinar and for the extraordinary work that you guys, that the girls are all doing. Just a comment to say, this is a unique opportunity for a reset in regards to the industry, I think, and government and its partnership. and maybe an opportunity to look at things that we were not contemplating only a year ago in terms of how we partner together. And I'm hoping that all of us will look at it that way and really look to the future, because there's extraordinary opportunities. I'm very optimistic about the future of the industry, and there's great opportunities out there as long as we have the common will to look at that. So, merci beaucoup d'avoir participé. I want to thank Yvan Baker. Thank you, Yvan, for making yourself available. And Matt Jeneroux. Matt, thank you very, very much. And Alexandre Boulerice, merci Alexandre. Et Simon-Pierre, merci beaucoup. Ça a été intéressant. All four of you were absolutely great, and we very much look forward to working with you. Thanks you, Mike, everyone. Merci. Au revoir.
Merci.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
That's a wrap for this episode, and thanks for listening. Please check out aiac.ca for more information, or if you would like to join AIC to be part of the conversation.